Last week, for the first time in 2 years, I tipped Carlton to beat North Melbourne. Well, that didn't end up being the case. After seeing Carlton's injuries, I decided to tip North Melbourne, and yes! Good thing I did, because I got an extra tip. Well, anyway, it's round 8, so let's get into the tips. On Friday night at the SCG is Sydney versus Essendon. I'm going to be tipping Essendon because on a logistic point of view, I still have faith for them. Not that I want to, but logistically. I still think Essendon are a good side. They only lost to Collingwood by 4 points, and then they had to play the ladder leaders last week, which is why they lost by quite a bit. So, Essendon are still playing alright at the moment. Sydney, on the other hand, are, well, let's put it, a rebuild phase right now. During a rebuild phase, it's hard to see teams win, and yeah, Sydney being on the bottom of the ladder, I think will stay there. They don't have a good record at the SCG. The list continues. That's why I'm going to be tipping Essendon. On Saturday afternoon on the planet Mars, Western Bulldogs versus Brisbane. I'm going to be tipping the Bulldogs. Now, I'm probably going to change it to Brisbane later. I'll check the teams. But for now, I'm tipping the Bulldogs based on what I saw last week against the Tigers and based on, well, they're not playing Port Adelaide at Mars, and the last time they played a Queensland side there, Gold Coast, Bulldogs ended up beating them. I think Bulldogs are a good enough side, and they've been at that stadium several times. Brisbane, they're playing on that ground for the very first time, and considering that Brisbane, they generally like to play in sunny conditions because they're from the sunny state, while Ballarat, it's really cold down there, like Mars. So I'm going to be tipping the Western Bulldogs. Just one note, Western Bulldogs should change their jersey to the old red jersey that they used to have. Brisbane, well, just wear their yellow. Okay. I'll start with the Mars jokes. It's actually in Ballarat. Alright, Saturday afternoon at the MCG, Carlton versus Collingwood. I'm going to be tipping Collingwood. Carlton, very disappointing against an equally disappointing North Melbourne side this year. And losing to them by a fair margin was pretty shocking, just to state. They've had some honourable losses, but coming up against a team like Collingwood, who haven't lost since they played West Coast. Am I correct in saying that? Yeah, they haven't lost since they played West Coast back in round 3. They've beaten several top sides like Essendon and... is there any others? And Brisbane, who are still pretty good, despite what I just said in the previous tip. Yeah, so that's why I'm going to be tipping Collingwood. Saturday twilight, or should I say Saturday night, because it's Queensland. Gold Coast versus Melbourne. I'm going to be tipping Melbourne. Well, they showed what they're capable of against Hawthorn last week. Gold Coast, they put up a good fight against the Eagles. And despite the fact it's at Metricon Stadium, I do think Melbourne, well, given that they found a win last week, they might get some confidence back. What's those noise? I think Melbourne can beat Gold Coast up at Metricon Stadium. To be fair, that game is quite even, so that result can go either way, but I'm just going to tip Melbourne. Yeah. Saturday night, Marvel Stadium, St Kilda versus West Coast. Okay, I'm tipping the Eagles, but I feel like I want to tip St Kilda, but they're not playing too well either. So that's the only reason why I'm tipping West Coast, given that they won last week, and they would go to that match knowing that if they lose this game, it's practically season over for West Coast. For St Kilda, well, they lost to Adelaide and GWS. Okay, the GWS one, given that it was at Manuka, that was kind of expected. But they lost to Adelaide, who are just as disappointing at the time as West Coast are right now. So West Coast will be going into that match in the same position as Adelaide was in a couple of weeks ago. And if they can win that match, then, well, they'll get their season rolling, I think. Also on Saturday night, the Adelaide Showdown, Adelaide versus Port Adelaide. Well, despite Adelaide, winning their last 3 games, and Port Adelaide, despite losing their last game, I think Port Adelaide are the better team out of the 2 sides. This can go either way, but I might change it. I don't know. But I haven't looked at the teams yet, so, But at the moment, I'm tipping Port Adelaide due to their... I would say overall, they've been more consistent than Adelaide. They've played a better brand of footy than Adelaide, in my opinion. Yeah, and that's why I'm tipping Port Adelaide. Sunday afternoon, Geelong versus North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium. North Melbourne, they're in the bottom 4. Geelong, top of the ladder, with just the 1 loss. No other team has just lost 1 game and won the other 6. So, who are you going to tip? North Melbourne, of course. Okay, Geelong, of course. I did that on purpose. Yeah, because Geelong's on top, so there's nothing much to say about that. Sunday afternoon at the MCG, Hawthorn versus GWS. Well, apart from the fact that GWS don't usually play well at the MCG, Hawthorn have been very inconsistent and lost to Melbourne, almost lost to Carlton at a ground which they usually play very well at. So, I think GWS can break their MCG hoodoo and beat Hawthorn. They're second on the ladder. Hawthorn, they're 13th? Something like that. Another easy tip, GWS for me. And lastly, this one's not an easy tip. At Optus Stadium, Fremantle versus Richmond. Fremantle barely scored last week. Okay, mind you, Adelaide didn't score all that much either. And Richmond lost to a disappointing Bulldogs side who had lost their previous 4 games. Well, disappointing before that game. The Bulldogs played pretty well on Saturday, but, So at Optus Stadium, considering Richmond don't play well on the road, I'm tipping Fremantle. It will be a very close game. I bet you David Mundy will be kicking after the siren again. Or something like that happening. Probably not after the siren, probably not David Mundy, but it'll come down to the last minute. But I'll tip Fremantle because it's at home and because they're not losing to teams like bloody Western Bulldogs. Okay, they lost to Gold Coast, but that was at Metricon, so I guess you can forgive them. Not really. And it was only by 3 points, not like the Richmond game where it was like bloody 46 points or whatever it was. I don't remember the exact margins, but you know what I mean. So yeah, that's why I'm tipping Fremantle. But they do need to bounce back from last Sunday's disappointing match. Actually, their defence... another point. Fremantle's defence was good last Sunday, actually. Because they were able to hold Adelaide to just 51 points. So, yeah. That's another reason why I'm tipping Fremantle. Richmond have a leaky defence. And not much firepower up forward, given that Jack Rewalt and Josh Caddy are out. So, to recap my tips, I am tipping Essendon, Western Bulldogs, although I might change that to Brisbane, Collingwood, Melbourne, although I might change that, West Coast, Port Adelaide, although I might change that to Adelaide as well, Geelong, GWS, and Fremantle. I hope you liked the video, and I'll tell you basically the changes that I make, if I make any. Please like this video, subscribe, view my other videos. Oh yeah, and thank you for 300 views on my last video in the space of 1 week. Thank you for that. Comment your tips down below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.